Bring her here now, the Mafia Boss said. One look at her left him heartbroken. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a quick favor to ask. Please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our channel's latest videos. It only takes a moment, it is completely free, and it is one of the best ways to support us as we continue bringing you more dramatic and emotional stories like this one. Your support truly means so much to us. And tell me, where are you watching from today? Share your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much for being here. Now, let us return to our main character and continue the story. The hardest orders are never the ones you give. They're the ones your heart refuses to obey. I built my empire on certainty. Every decision I made was measured, calculated, and final. People feared my silence more than another man's anger because they understood one simple truth. I never gave an order without a reason. That Tuesday evening began like hundreds before it. Rain traced slow lines across the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, turning the Manhattan skyline into a blur of silver lights. The city beneath me looked peaceful from 42 stories above, almost innocent, but I knew better. Every block carried a secret. Every polished street hid another bargain no judge would ever hear about. I stood with a glass of sparkling water untouched beside my desk, my hands resting behind my back as I watched lightning flash beyond the Hudson. Marco entered without knocking. He had worked beside me for 12 years, one of the few men who understood when to speak and when to disappear. Even he hesitated before opening his mouth. "Boss, we found something." I didn't turn around. If it was important enough to interrupt me, then stop wasting time. He swallowed. "It's not something. It's someone." Those words finally made me face him. Marco rarely looked uncertain. Tonight, his shoulders were stiff, and his eyes carried the weight of a question he couldn't answer himself. "A young woman," he continued carefully. "She came asking about an old address. One of the addresses connected to." His voice trailed off. He didn't need to finish. My pulse slowed instead of quickening, a habit earned through years of refusing to let emotion make decisions for me. "Go on." "She had something with her." He reached into his jacket and placed a photograph on my desk. It wasn't a clear picture. One of my security men had taken it from across the lobby. The image showed only the side of a woman standing beneath the marble entrance lights, her blonde hair damp from the rain, a faded leather satchel hanging from one shoulder. She looked ordinary, too ordinary to belong anywhere near my world. Yet there was one detail that caught my attention. Around her neck rested a delicate silver pendant. Even through the grainy photograph, I recognized its shape instantly. My breathing stopped. The room became impossibly quiet. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled across the city, but it sounded distant, as if I had been pulled backward through time. That pendant wasn't rare because of its design. It was rare because only two had ever existed. I had buried one with the woman I couldn't save. The other had disappeared 15 years ago without leaving behind a single answer. I picked up the photograph with fingers that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Impossible. I'd spent years searching every state, every record, every forgotten name. My investigators had exhausted every lead until there was nothing left but grief dressed as acceptance. Yet here she was, or at least the ghost of a possibility. Marco watched me with visible concern. "Boss." I stared at the young woman frozen inside the photograph. She wasn't looking at the camera. She wasn't looking at anyone. She simply stood beneath the rain as though she had no idea that one small piece of silver had just shattered 15 years of carefully constructed silence. Every instinct told me this had to be another coincidence. Another cruel trick my memory wanted to believe. But another voice, one I had buried long ago, whispered that fate never knocked twice without demanding a price. I lowered the photograph onto my desk and finally spoke, my voice quieter than anyone in that room had ever heard it. "Bring her here. Now." I have spent years teaching myself that memories can lie. Faces blur. Voices fade. Regret has a way of reshaping the past until it becomes something almost unrecognizable. That belief had protected me for 15 years. It was the only reason I could still sleep at night. Then the elevator doors opened. Marco stepped out first, his expression as unreadable as always, but I barely noticed him. My eyes were already fixed on the woman walking 2 steps behind him. She wore a navy blue raincoat that had begun to dry at the shoulders. Tiny drops of water still clung to loose strands of blonde hair resting against her cheek. She looked around my office with quiet uncertainty, not fear, simply the cautious curiosity of someone who had wandered into a place that clearly did not belong to her world. She could not have been older than 27. She carried herself like someone who had spent her life solving problems instead of creating them. A worn leather satchel rested against her side, its corners softened by years of daily use. She looked more like a teacher leaving school than someone standing inside the headquarters of the most powerful man in the city. Then she lifted her eyes toward mine. Everything inside me stopped. The same blue-gray eyes. The same gentle curve at the corner of her smile, even though she was not smiling. Even the tiny crease between her eyebrows when she was confused. I had seen those details before. Thousands of times. They belonged to a woman whose photograph still sat locked inside the bottom drawer of my desk because I had never found the strength to throw it away. My heartbeat echoed louder than the rain outside. I realized I had not spoken a single word since she entered the room. Marco shifted slightly beside the door, clearly waiting for instructions that never came. The young woman finally broke the silence herself. "I am sorry if there has been some misunderstanding," she said politely. "Your employees asked me to come with them. They said you had questions." Her voice carried no accusation, only confusion. I searched her face for recognition, for any sign that she knew who I was, but there was nothing. She looked at me the way anyone would look at a complete stranger. Somehow that hurt more than I expected. "What is your name?" I asked quietly. "Claire Bennett." The answer landed like another crack across the foundation I had built beneath my life. Bennett, a name I had never encountered during years of searching. It should have relieved me. Instead, it deepened the mystery. "Do you know why you came here today?" She shook her head slowly. "No, sir. I was trying to find someone who used to live at an old apartment building in Brooklyn. The manager told me the property had changed owners years ago. Then your security team approached me." Brooklyn. Another familiar word. Another forgotten piece trying to force its way back into the light. My attention drifted to the silver pendant resting against her neck. Up close, I could see every tiny scratch on its surface, every mark left behind by years of being worn. It was real, not a copy, not a coincidence. Claire noticed where I was looking and gently touched the pendant with 2 fingers. "Is something wrong?" she asked. I opened my mouth, but no answer came. For the first time since becoming the man everyone feared, I realized I had no idea what question I was supposed to ask next. I have learned that the most dangerous questions are never asked with anger. They are asked with hope. Hope makes a man careless. Hope makes him hear answers that were never spoken. I pulled a chair away from the conference table and motioned for Claire to sit. She hesitated for only a second before lowering herself into the leather chair, placing her weathered satchel carefully beside her feet. She kept one hand resting lightly against the silver pendant around her neck, almost as if she did not realize she was doing it. Some habits are older than memory. I knew that because I had a few of my own. I remained standing near the window. Distance helped me think. At least, that was what I told myself. "Where did you get the pendant?" I asked. She looked down at it before meeting my eyes again. "I have had it for as long as I can remember." "Who gave it to you?" She smiled apologetically. "I wish I knew." My chest tightened. "You do not remember?" She slowly shook her head. "I remember pieces of my childhood. Not all of it. My parents always said I was very young when they adopted me." Adopted. The word echoed through my mind like distant thunder. "How old were you?" "About 5, according to the paperwork." 5. 15 years ago. The numbers fit together too easily, and I refused to trust them. Coincidences existed. They had to. Otherwise, the universe would be far crueler than I had ever imagined. "What do you remember before that?" I asked. Claire frowned, as if searching through a room filled with fog. "Very little. Sometimes I dream about rain. A woman humming a song I cannot quite remember. There is an old brownstone building with ivy growing along the brick walls. A staircase. A white cat that always sat on the front steps." She laughed softly, embarrassed by how strange it sounded. I know that probably makes no sense. It made too much sense. Every detail settled somewhere deep inside me, where I had spent years locking away memories that refused to stay buried. The brownstone, the ivy, even the old cat that had wandered into the courtyard every afternoon looking for scraps. I remembered all of it. I remembered laughing because someone insisted the cat was luckier than either of us. I closed my eyes for one brief second before forcing them open again. "Did your adoptive parents ever tell you where they found you?" Claire answered almost immediately. Boston. My heartbeat stumbled. But I never believed that was the whole story. Why not? She looked toward the rain sliding across the windows. Because every time I asked questions, they became uncomfortable. They loved me. I have never doubted that. They gave me a wonderful life. But whenever I mentioned the pendant or my early memories, they always changed the subject. Her honesty carried no resentment, only quiet curiosity. Last month my father passed away. Her voice softened. While going through I used to believe that every secret could be uncovered if you were willing to spend enough money, enough time, and enough patience. That belief had built an empire around me. Tonight, for the first time, I hoped it was still true. Claire accepted the cup of hot tea one of my staff quietly placed in front of her. She thanked him with the same gentle smile she had worn since arriving, completely unaware that my world was shifting beneath my feet. I excused myself with the promise that I would return in a few minutes. She nodded without protest. As the office door closed behind me, every trace of hesitation disappeared from my face. Marco, I said. He was already waiting in the hallway. Conference room. 5 minutes. By the time I walked inside, 3 members of my intelligence team were seated around the long oak table with laptops already open. They knew better than to ask unnecessary questions. I slid the photograph across the polished surface. Everything on her. Claire Bennett. Her adoptive parents. School records. Medical records. Tax records. Property records. I want every document that exists. One of the analysts nodded immediately. How far back? As far as the truth begins. The room fell silent for half a second before fingers began moving across keyboards. Screens filled with public databases, archived newspapers, genealogy records, and adoption registries. I watched line after line appear while the rain continued tapping against the windows beyond the conference room. 20 minutes passed before the first answer arrived. Claire Bennett. The analyst began carefully. Elementary school teacher. Lives alone in Brooklyn. No criminal history. Excellent employment record. Volunteers twice a month at a children's reading program. Financially stable. Very ordinary life. Ordinary. That word felt strangely comforting. It meant whoever she had become was built on kindness instead of fear. Another analyst leaned forward. Her adoptive parents, Michael and Susan Bennett, moved from Boston to New York 6 weeks ago to be closer to medical specialists during Mr. Bennett's illness. Before Boston, he paused. There's a gap. I looked directly at him. Explain. He enlarged a government archive on the screen. Their documented history begins in Massachusetts 15 years ago. Before that, there are almost no digital records. Driver licenses were reissued. Addresses changed. Employment history restarts. Marco folded his arms. People do not accidentally erase 10 years of paperwork. Exactly, I answered quietly. The third analyst cleared her throat. There is something else. She turned her monitor toward me. A scanned adoption document filled the screen. Large portions had been legally sealed, but one section remained visible. Date of placement. 15 years ago. Child's estimated age. 5 years old. Place of transfer. The line beneath it had been blacked out so heavily that it looked as though someone had wanted to erase the location forever. I stared at the dark rectangle until my reflection appeared inside the screen. Someone had hidden this on purpose. This was no administrative mistake. It was a decision. Can you recover the missing information? I asked. The analyst hesitated. Eventually, whoever sealed this wanted it buried. But nothing stays buried forever. I nodded once. Do it. As everyone returned to work, Marco remained standing beside me. Boss, he said quietly, do you really think she is connected to your past? I looked through the glass wall toward my office. Claire sat alone by the window, reading one of the books from my shelf while occasionally sipping her tea. She looked peaceful, almost as though she had forgotten she was inside the headquarters of one of the most powerful men in New York. She had no idea that an invisible thread had begun pulling 2 lives toward a truth neither of us was prepared to face. I do not know who she is, I admitted. But I know one thing. Marco waited. I never looked away from Claire as I answered. Someone spent 15 years making sure we would never find each other. That is no coincidence. That is a story someone was desperate to keep unfinished. I have watched powerful men lose everything because they ignored the smallest warning. It was never the loud disasters that destroyed them. It was the quiet details they dismissed as coincidence. Claire was still sitting by the window when I returned to my office. The rain had finally begun to ease, leaving thin streams of water sliding down the glass while the lights of Manhattan slowly sharpened against the dark sky. She had closed the book and was staring outside, lost somewhere inside her own thoughts. When she heard the door open, she immediately stood. "I hope I have not caused any trouble," she said with an apologetic smile. "You have been very kind, but I am sure you have more important things to do." I almost laughed at the irony. Nothing inside my world felt more important than the woman standing a few feet away from me. "Please sit," I said. "There are still a few things I would like to understand." She nodded, although I could see the uncertainty growing behind her calm expression. I poured another cup of tea for both of us before taking the chair across from her. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The silence felt strangely peaceful. It reminded me that not every conversation needed to become an interrogation. "Claire," I finally said, "has anyone else ever asked about your pendant?" She thought carefully before answering. "No. Most people never even notice it." "Has anyone followed you recently? Called you unexpectedly? Asked unusual questions?" Her eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Actually," she hesitated. "About 2 weeks ago, someone came to my school asking whether I had lived in New York as a child. The front office thought he might have been researching family history." My attention sharpened immediately. "Did you meet him?" "No. He left before I could." "Did anyone describe him?" "Only that he wore a gray coat and spoke very politely. A polite stranger asking questions about her past." Before I could respond, my phone vibrated once on the desk. "Marco." I glanced at the message. "Surveillance footage recovered. Unknown male observed near Bennett residence 3 separate evenings." My jaw tightened without thinking. Claire noticed the change in my expression. "Is everything all right?" she asked softly. I looked at her for a long moment before making a decision I had not expected to make. "No," I answered honestly. "I do not think it is." Confusion crossed her face. "What do you mean?" I folded my hands together, choosing every word with care. "I believe someone has been looking for you." She blinked twice, almost certain she had misunderstood. "Looking for me? What?" "That is what I intend to find out." She gave a nervous laugh that disappeared almost immediately. "I am an elementary school teacher. My life is painfully ordinary. I think you might have the wrong person." I wished that were true. More than anything, I wished I could tell her this had all been one impossible misunderstanding. Instead, I stood and walked toward the window overlooking the city. Thousands of headlights flowed through the streets below like rivers of light, each one carrying someone home. Home. I realized I could not allow Claire to return to hers until I understood who else knew she was here. "Until I have answers," I said quietly, still facing the skyline. "I would feel better if you stayed somewhere secure." She looked at me with obvious concern. "You mean here?" I turned back toward her. "Only for a little while. You are free to say no. You are not my prisoner. But if my instincts are right, sending you home tonight would be the first mistake I have made in 15 years. Claire searched my face, perhaps expecting to find manipulation or hidden motives. Instead, she found only something I had not allowed anyone to see in a very long time. Concern. After several silent seconds, she slowly nodded. "All right," she whispered. "I do not understand any of this. But, for some reason, I believe you." And those 5 simple words carried more weight than every promise I had ever heard in my entire life. I once believed betrayal always arrived wearing an unfamiliar face. Experience taught me otherwise. The greatest betrayals usually came from people who already knew every weakness you had spent years trying to hide. Claire had been shown to one of the guest suites overlooking Central Park. It was elegant without being overwhelming, quiet without feeling isolated. I wanted her to feel safe, not confined. There was a difference, and I needed her to understand it. She thanked every member of my staff she met, even the housekeeper who brought fresh towels. That simple kindness stood out in a building where most visitors measured people by their status instead of their character. I watched the security cameras for a moment longer before walking back to my office. Marco was already waiting beside my desk, holding a tablet in one hand. He did not need to speak. The expression on his face told me the night had just become more complicated. "Show me," I said. He placed the tablet on the desk. Security footage from a traffic camera filled the screen. A gray sedan sat across the street from Claire's apartment building. The timestamp showed 3 consecutive evenings during the previous week. The vehicle never parked anywhere else. It simply waited. Then, exactly 40 minutes later, it drove away. Same license plate every time? I asked. Marco nodded. No registered owner. The plates belonged to a vehicle reported destroyed 6 years ago. I exhaled slowly. Someone had planned this carefully. Anything else? He opened another file. The man who visited Claire's school signed the guest log with a false name. The handwriting analysis matches a signature we found in an old property transfer connected to the Brooklyn address she was searching for. My attention locked onto the document. Whose signature? Marco hesitated for the first time that evening. Daniel Mercer. The name settled over the room like cold winter air. I had not heard it spoken in 15 years. Most people believed Daniel Mercer had disappeared after a series of financial investigations forced him into retirement. I had always suspected the truth was far more complicated. Daniel had once managed charitable housing projects across New York, including the very brownstone Claire described from her fragmented childhood memories. If his name had resurfaced now, it was not by accident. Find him, I said quietly. We have been trying. Marco lowered his voice. Every trail ends the same way. Records erased. Addresses abandoned. Phone numbers disconnected. It is as if someone has been cleaning behind him for years. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as memories I had buried began arranging themselves into something far more dangerous than coincidence. 15 years ago, people vanished from my life. Documents disappeared. Witnesses forgot conversations they once swore they remembered. At the time, grief had made me accept what logic should have questioned. Now every missing piece seemed connected by one invisible hand. My phone vibrated again. This time it was not Marco. It was the head of my private archive division. I answered immediately. Tell me. The voice on the other end sounded unusually tense. Sir, we recovered part of the sealed adoption file. I remained completely still. What does it say? The child was not transferred from Boston. My heartbeat slowed. Where was she transferred from? A brief silence followed before he answered. Brooklyn. I closed my eyes. Every instinct I possessed had been pointing toward that answer, yet hearing it spoken made it infinitely more real. Claire had not traveled to Brooklyn searching for her past. She had unknowingly returned to the place where it had begun. I ended the call and looked through the glass wall toward the hallway outside the guest suites. At that exact moment, Claire stepped out carrying the same worn leather satchel, pausing to admire a painting hanging nearby, as though she did not have a single reason to fear tomorrow. She still believed she was chasing forgotten memories. She did not realize the memories had already begun chasing her. I used to think the truth would set me free. Standing in my office before sunrise, I finally understood that the truth could become its own prison. The city was still asleep beneath a blanket of pale gray clouds when Marco walked in carrying a weathered cardboard archive box that smelled faintly of old paper and dust. He placed it on my desk without saying a word. Every file inside had been recovered from a storage facility scheduled for demolition more than a decade ago. Most people would have called it forgotten history. I knew better. Forgotten history had a way of deciding the future. I opened the first folder carefully. Utility bills, property inspections, tenant records. Nothing unusual. Then I reached a faded photograph clipped to the back of a maintenance report. My fingers froze. The picture showed the front steps of the Brooklyn brownstone Claire had described from her dreams. Ivy climbed along the brick walls exactly as she remembered. A worn white cat sat proudly beside the entrance. And standing near the doorway was a young woman with bright eyes and a warm smile that had once convinced me the world could still be kind. My heart ached in a way I had not allowed it to for 15 years. Beside her stood a little girl no older than 5. She was laughing at something outside the frame while clutching the same silver pendant that now rested around Claire's neck. I stared at the child's face until every doubt I had been holding on to quietly disappeared. It was Claire. Younger. Happier. Completely unaware that someone had erased her life before she was old enough to remember it. Marco slowly exhaled beside me. You were right. I shook my head. No. My voice barely sounded like my own. I spent 15 years believing I was searching for answers. I was searching for her. I looked at the woman in the photograph again. Emily. The only person who had ever seen the man behind the reputation everyone else feared. She had believed I could become something better than the world expected. When she disappeared, every investigation ended with the same impossible conclusion. No witnesses. No explanation. No child. Nothing except silence. I had accepted that silence because I believed I had no other choice. Now I realized silence had never been the truth. It had been carefully built. My phone rang. The number belonged to the archive division. "We found one more document," the analyst said. It was hidden inside a false binding. I waited. It is a handwritten letter signed by Daniel Mercer. My grip tightened around the phone. "Read it." Paper rustled before the analyst spoke. "If anyone ever finds this child, tell them none of this happened by accident. The people responsible are still watching. Protect her before you explain anything." The line went silent for several seconds. "There is one more sentence," the analyst continued quietly. "She was never the target. She was the witness." I closed my eyes as every memory I had buried rearranged itself into a horrifying new shape. Claire had not been hidden because someone wanted to take her away. She had been hidden because someone wanted to keep her alive. A gentle knock interrupted the silence. I turned toward the office door. Claire stood there holding 2 mugs of coffee, offering one to me with a small, tired smile. "I noticed you were already awake," she said. "I thought you might need this." She had no idea that she was carrying ordinary coffee into the middle of a life-changing revelation. She crossed the room, placed the mug on my desk, and glanced down at the old photograph lying beside my hand. Her smile slowly faded. Her breathing caught. She reached toward the image almost without thinking, her fingertips trembling as they hovered above the little girl standing beside the woman with familiar blue-gray eyes. Then she whispered 7 words that turned every certainty inside me into dust. "I have seen this woman in my dreams. I have negotiated billion-dollar deals without my hands shaking. I have stood in rooms where every word carried consequences measured in lives and futures. Yet nothing prepared me for watching Claire stare at that faded photograph as though she were standing at the edge of a forgotten life. She did not touch it immediately. Her fingertips hovered above the worn paper, while tears gathered in her blue-gray eyes for reasons she could not explain. "I know her face," she whispered again, almost to herself. "I have never remembered where from, but she has always been there. Sometimes she is singing. Sometimes she is smiling at me from a garden. Every time I wake up before I can reach her." I slowly lowered myself into the chair across from her. The coffee she had brought me remained untouched, its gentle steam rising between us like another unanswered question. For several long moments, I simply watched her. Not because I was searching for more evidence, but because I was trying to find the courage I had spent 15 years pretending I no longer needed. "Her name was Emily," I said quietly. Claire lifted her eyes toward mine. I could see confusion mixing with hope, 2 emotions that rarely belong together. "You knew her?" she asked. I nodded once. "She was the kindest person I have ever met." The words came more easily than I expected. She believed people deserved second chances long before they earned them. She walked into hospitals carrying books for children she had never met. She remembered birthdays everyone else forgot. She made every room feel warmer simply by entering it. Claire listened without interrupting. There was no fear in her expression anymore. Only quiet attention. "What happened to her?" she finally asked. I looked toward the rain-speckled windows before answering. 15 years ago, she disappeared. Every lead vanished. Every witness remembered something different. Eventually, the world accepted that some questions would never be answered. My voice became softer. I accepted it too. That was my greatest mistake. Claire glanced back at the photograph. The little girl beside her. She stopped before finishing the sentence, almost afraid of the answer. I reached into the archive box and removed the recovered letter from Daniel Mercer. The paper had yellowed with time, its edges fragile from years spent hidden inside forgotten files. I placed it carefully beside the photograph. "This letter was written before everything changed," I explained. "It says the child was hidden to protect her." Claire read the visible lines slowly. Her breathing became uneven. "The witness," she murmured. "What does that mean?" "I do not know. Not yet." That was the hardest sentence I had spoken in years because I had always been the man with answers. Today I had nothing except pieces that refused to fit together. Claire leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a brief moment. "When I was little," she said softly, "I used to draw the same house over and over again. My parents always thought I imagined it. I stopped because I did not want them to worry." She opened her eyes and looked directly at me. It had ivy climbing the walls. A chill ran through me. Every memory she uncovered matched another forgotten piece of the past. There were no coincidences left to hide behind. Just before I could respond, Marco entered without knocking, something he never did unless absolutely necessary. His expression was calm, but I knew him well enough to recognize the urgency beneath it. He handed me a sealed envelope recovered less than an hour earlier from Daniel Mercer's abandoned storage unit. Across the front, written in neat blue ink that had faded with time, were 7 words that stole the air from my lungs. To Adrian, open this only when she returns. I stared at the envelope without moving. 15 years ago, someone had already known this day would come. The question was no longer whether Claire's past had been stolen. The real question was who had been waiting all these years for us to find it together. I used to believe redemption was something a man earned after a lifetime of perfect choices. Standing in my office with Daniel Mercer's sealed envelope in my hands, I finally understood that redemption begins the moment you stop running from the truth. The paper crackled softly as I broke the seal. The handwriting inside was steady, deliberate, as though Daniel had known someone would eventually read every word. Adrian, if this letter has reached you, then Claire has found her way home. I prayed she would never need to know what happened, but I knew one day the truth would ask to be heard. Emily trusted only 2 people with her daughter, me and you. She believed that if anything ever happened to her, you would protect the child before you protected yourself. I stopped reading. My vision blurred for the first time in years. Claire remained silent across the desk, giving me the space to continue when I was ready. I took a slow breath and forced myself onward. Emily discovered financial records that exposed powerful people hiding behind charitable organizations. She refused to stay silent. Before she disappeared, she asked me to take Claire somewhere no one would think to look. The adoption was real, but it was never abandonment. It was love disguised as goodbye. Michael and Susan Bennett honored that promise every day of their lives. If Claire is reading this, tell her she was never forgotten. She was protected by people who loved her more than themselves. I lowered the letter without realizing tears had escaped down my face. For 15 years I had carried guilt heavy enough to convince myself I had failed everyone who mattered. Emily had never blamed me. She had trusted me, even when I was too broken to deserve it. Claire quietly reached across the desk and folded the letter with extraordinary care before placing it beside the faded photograph. My parents never lied when they told me they chose me, she whispered. They just could not tell me why. I nodded. They kept their promise. She smiled through tears that reflected both grief and gratitude. And so did you. I looked at her in disbelief. I did not even know where you were. Maybe not, she answered softly. But you never stopped looking. Those words settled somewhere deep inside me, somewhere untouched by power, fear, or regret. Later that afternoon, we drove together to the old Brooklyn brownstone. Time had weathered the bricks, but the ivy still climbed faithfully along the walls. The front steps had been restored, and children laughed in the nearby park just as they probably had years before. Claire stood quietly beneath the old oak tree, holding the silver pendant while closing her eyes. The breeze carried the faint scent of spring flowers through the courtyard. I remember this place, she whispered. Not everything, just enough. I stood beside her without speaking. Some moments deserved silence more than words. Before we left, Claire placed fresh white roses beneath the tree where the old photograph had once been taken. Not as a farewell, but as a promise that forgotten stories could still find their ending. As we walked back toward the car, she glanced at me with the same calm smile that had changed everything the moment I first saw it. What happens now? She asked. I looked toward the city skyline glowing beneath the late afternoon sun. The empire I had spent years building suddenly seemed far less important than the life standing beside me. Now, I answered, we stop letting the past decide who we become. She slipped the pendant beneath her coat and nodded. For the first time in 15 years, I did not feel haunted by what I had lost. I felt grateful for what had finally been found. Because power can protect a city, wealth can change a future, and influence can silence countless voices, but only truth has the strength to bring a broken heart home.